Hi everybody, hola amigos, Lee here from Busted Knuckle Woodworks. Welcome to part 2 of this comprehensive unboxing, assembly, setup, and review of the new 2022 model Laguna C Flux 1. In part 1, we went through the evaluation process, choosing the right kind of dust collection system for the shop, and unboxing and putting together the machine. Here in part 2, I'll talk about how I'm actually using it in my shop, what fittings I'm using, how I'm running the hoses, the Izzy Swan Quickloc system that I'm using to connect the tools, the iVac system that automates everything. Really, everything you need to set up effective dust collection in a small workshop, regardless of whether you're using the C Flux 1 or any other comparable dust collection system. I do want to mention again that Laguna is not sponsoring this video. I have no affiliation with Laguna. I paid for this entire system with my own money, so you can trust me when I tell you. This thing really sucks. In a good way. Let's talk about it. So now we have the Laguna C Flux 1 all set up, which you saw in the last video, I hope. Part 1 is where we went through the unboxing and step-by-step assembly, so check that out if you're interested. First, I want to point out some of the more important features of this machine. It's got a 1.5 horsepower motor running on 110 volts. You can wire it up to run on 220, and the instructions are included for that. It's completely mobile and rolls very easily on 4-inch casters. The front casters do lock, which is a new feature on the 2022 model. This is a 1 micron canister filter, and it's actually measured at 99.97% efficiency down to 0.2 of a micron. To give you an idea of how small that is, a red blood cell is about 8 microns in diameter, so the return air coming out of this is very clean. It's got a manual cleaning handle with a dual paddle design that's new on this 2022 model. You can also upgrade this to a motorized auto cleaning system. There's a 25-gallon drum. The design has been updated for 2022 with fewer seams and only 2 panels for easy assembly. It's got a dust display window, and this max level indicator is new for 2022. It accommodates these heavy-duty dust bags sold by any Laguna dealer, though you can use it without the dust bag as well. The drum release mechanism is just pure genius. Really, it is. If you've ever struggled with the drum release latches on other systems, this is something you will really appreciate. It seals tightly, and there's no hose in between the drum and the cyclone like you'll find on most other systems. When you're ready to empty the drum, just drop it and roll it away. No fiddling with clamps or lining things up. Simple and foolproof. I love that. It includes a high-frequency remote that rejects interference and doesn't require line of sight to operate. So that covers most of the important points. Next, let me explain how I'm using this here in my shop. I know a lot of people run permanent ductwork in their shops, and I briefly considered it myself, but I quickly abandoned that idea for several reasons. First, installing ductwork is expensive, like super expensive. You'll need the ducts, fittings, couplers, drops, and blast gates at every tool, plus all the associated hardware, and that all adds up fast. Installing a ductwork system, even in a small shop, can easily run you as much as the dust collector itself, and maybe even more. Second, permanent ductwork really kills mobility. You're limited to placing your tools where your drops are, and that ductwork takes up valuable wall or ceiling space or floor space that most small shops simply can't afford to give up. And third, for a one-person shop, I honestly don't think it's necessary. Running ductwork to your tools is a good idea if you have several people in your shop running tools simultaneously, but quite frankly, if that's the case, you might want to consider a larger collector than this one to run it. I'm a one-person shop, and if you're watching this, it's pretty likely you are too. I'm only running one tool at a time here, so it just makes sense to move the dust collection from tool to tool as needed. So what I've done is to run two 4-inch dust right hoses from Rockler. These are excellent hoses, by the way. I have them connected to the Laguna using these rubber unions connected to metal blast gates. If you're going to use blast gates at the collector, which I recommend in a setup like this, stick to the metal ones. The plastic ones are garbage. And speaking of blast gates, you want to make sure when operating a dust collector, whether you're running ductwork or not, to always have at least one blast gate open. Running with everything closed will, of course, defeat the purpose, but more importantly, it will starve the system of air and could possibly overheat the motor. I have two 4-inch hoses coming off this machine. One stays connected to the table saw all the time. The other I can move to whichever tool I'm using. For the fittings, I'm using the Izzy Swan Quickloc system. You can buy these at izzyswan.com, and I believe you can get them now from Taylor Toolworks at taytools.com. This is a 2-part system consisting of a hose plate and a tool plate. I have 2 of these hose plates, one for each hose, and each tool has a tool plate that mates with it. I have plates on my jointer, my planer, my bandsaw. I have a setup here on my router table where I've installed the tool plate onto a coupler, which I've connected to this set of drawers I built for the table. I have a length of clear 4-inch hose connected underneath the table and a length of 2.5-inch hose connected to the fence. And I bring those together with a Y fitting back here. Pretty convenient. I also have a tool plate connected to my miter saw. This has improved my dust collection on this saw by quite a bit, although dust collection on most miter saws really isn't that great to begin with. So to connect the tool, you just snap these together like this. To disconnect the tool, you just unsnap it, then move it and snap it to another tool. Once they're connected, they're never going to come apart or get pulled off the tool by accident. This is definitely an amazing system which I highly recommend. Another thing I have going on here is an iVac system. The power cords on the tools are connected to a transmitter. When the transmitter senses that the tool is drawing power, it sends a signal to this Pro Switch outlet. The Pro Switch is timed so that it turns on a few seconds after the signal is received. That's because a tool typically draws the most power when it's first turned on, so you don't want your tool and your dust collector drawing max power at the same time. You'd be popping breakers all the time that way. It also stays on for a few seconds after the tool is powered down, which ensures any residual dust in the hose is collected. Pretty smart. I highly recommend this iVac system mainly because it avoids the #1 biggest weakness in any dust collection system, which is, of course, forgetting to turn it on.
I know, I forgot again. Maybe that's a sign.
I do want to point out a couple of important points when using an iVac with this unit or others like it. First, the iVac system isn't really designed to directly power dust collectors over 1 horsepower. And second, it's not designed to support dust collectors with a magnetic switch, which the Laguna has. I was able to get around both of these restrictions by wiring up this heavy-duty relay. The current to the motor passes through the relay instead of the iVac Pro Switch. The Pro Switch just closes and opens the relay, which by itself draws very little current. By wiring the relay in line with the motor, it ensures that constant power is supplied to the switch, which means, of course, the light will stay on all the time. This mod isn't really hard to do, but if you don't feel comfortable with electrical things, hire someone to help you out, or just use the remote control. By the way, it's worth mentioning that if you do install an iVac system and want to go back to using the remote at some point, you can easily do that by setting the Pro Switch to the on position. And speaking of the remote, if you opt to use it, here's a good practice that applies to any dust collector with remote control. Always time the way you turn your dust collector on and off the same way the iVac does. In other words, don't turn your tool and the dust collector on at the exact same time. Turn the collector on first, wait a few seconds, then power up the tool and do your thing. Afterwards, let the collector run for a few extra seconds to clear out the hoses and ductwork before you power it down. One thing I wanted to talk about a little bit is table saw dust collection over the table. I've never used it on this table saw. Reason being, one, my old system wouldn't have handled it very well, and two, it forces you to use this blade guard, and I really hate these blade guards. I never use these. It took me about an hour just to find this one for the video. They don't really make the cut any safer in my opinion. They're really just meant to keep stuff from falling on top of the blade, which quite honestly, I just don't find very useful. That being said, now that I have this set up, I may give it a try, see how it goes. Still deciding on that one. So all there is left to do is put this thing to work. While I'm doing that, go ahead and hit the like button and please subscribe to the channel. I've got several more videos in the works and you'll be notified of all of them if you subscribe. Thanks. Well, I've been using the Laguna C Flux one in my shop for a couple of weeks now. And in that time, I've given this thing a run for its money, using it on every tool in my shop and putting it through some real world punishment. So listen up, class. I'm ready to whip up my red pencil and hand out some grades.
I need a light, man.
Class!
Give me a light.
Shut up!
First up, packaging. I'm giving Laguna an A here. Everything was securely packaged, all the parts were intact, the box was rugged and sturdy, the corners were reinforced with 1/4-inch plywood inside. I picked this unit up from a dealer myself, but if you don't have a dealer near you, I wouldn't hesitate to order it online and get this shipped directly. That can be a risky proposition sometimes, I know, but in this case, I think you'd be okay. Once you unbox the unit, the first thing you'll be laying your hands on are the assembly instructions, and for those, I'm giving a C. As these things go, they weren't horrendously bad, and they were written in something resembling normal English, which was refreshing. That said, still definitely room for improvement. As I mentioned in part 1 of the video, some of the steps just weren't very clear. The instructions were ambiguous at times, and they left out a few pretty important things I felt they should have mentioned. Thankfully, I've been at this for a while, so I've had a lot of practice slogging my way through crappy instruction manuals. By the way, if anyone from Laguna is watching, here's a tip. Perhaps consider hiring a real product photographer who knows something about proper lighting and exposure. Your photos look like they were taken with a cracked iPhone on the surface of Mars. So I differentiate ease of assembly from the assembly instructions themselves. Here I'm talking about how easy the whole thing goes together, and for that, I'm giving the Laguna C Flux 1 an A.
Hooray!
All the holes were properly aligned and nothing was misthreaded, so I didn't need to doctor or anything to get the parts to fit. The hardware was easy to find. Everything was the right size. Something worth noting is the superior design of the base system, which lets you attach the base while the unit is upside down. Other units like the Jet I talked about in part 1 suggest you use a hoist to lift the impeller and cyclone assembly onto the base. I mean, who has a hoist in their woodworking shop? Keep in mind, you will definitely need 2 people to flip this over, but that's to be expected when unboxing a unit of this size. Fit and finish gets an A. But what else would you expect from Laguna? They make some of the finest looking tools in the business, and the C-Flux one is no exception. All the welds are nice and tight, nothing looks crooked or out of whack. I like that the impeller housing, cyclone, and drum are all powder coated, and the powder coating is top notch. The whole unit is well designed and built, and it just looks pretty in my shop. What else can I say? Once you get past all the fluffery, fluffery? Is fluffery even a word? Anyway, the big question is, does it perform? How well does it operate? How well are you going to get along with this thing day to day? And for me, another A. Of course, I definitely expected a lot of improvement going from this to this, but even I was surprised at the difference having a real dust collection system actually makes around the shop. I've noticed that the shop is staying a lot cleaner in general, and there's not nearly as much airborne dust as there was before, or dust on surfaces, so that's definitely great. I find I'm not having to blow dust out of my table saw nearly as often, a pretty messy chore I do not miss at all. So I mentioned earlier in the video about over-the-table dust collection. One thing I'm noticing is that now that the under-the-table dust collection is so much more effective, I'm not getting nearly as much dust on top of the table. I'm still getting some, but not really enough to bother with the blade guard and a bunch of extra hose. Another thing is I am especially loving this setup for the planer. Before this, I just had a bag I would stuff underneath the stand, connected with a few feet of 4-inch clear hose, and just let the chips blow into that. And believe me, emptying that bag was an unholy mess. Thankfully, that's all a thing of the past. Frankly, I was a little bit worried about how it would perform, given that the planer has its own internal blower, but it's running like a champ, so I'm happy. The tool hose I'm using is the Dust Rate 4-foot to 28-foot, which is the longest one Rockler sells. Using such a long hose was something I was a little apprehensive about. As a general rule, it's best to keep hose runs as short as possible to reduce suction loss in the system. However, the Laguna is handling it fine, even for my longest tool reach, which is over there to the router table, so definitely no worries there. Customer service. Customer service. As I went through the assembly process, as I mentioned, the instructions were kind of confusing, so I did call Laguna's technical support with a couple of questions. In fact, I called them not once, not twice, not 3 times, 4 times, and they did not return any of my calls. Guys, this is not good. They did send me an email after the second call with a link to a generic video that didn't answer my question. Seeing that I had called them in the first place and asked for a return call and didn't get one and got a generic email instead, well, that's no bueno in my book. So you're losing points on this one, guys. Sorry, you get a D. For customer service, a D, which is pretty bad considering the average in this industry is a pretty low bar to meet. In fact, I would really love to hear from you guys what kind of customer service experience you've had with Laguna, good or bad. Maybe this was an anomaly, I don't know. Put it in the comments, I'd love to hear it. And finally, we come to what I consider most important in any tool purchase, value for money. Not just cost, because this machine comes in at $2,000, which makes it one of the more expensive in this category. I'm talking here about value for money, how much you're getting for what you pay. And here, The C-Flux one gets another A. I think the power, added features, the superior design make the modest price difference over competing machines worth it, in my opinion. You definitely won't regret kicking in a few $100s more for everything that you're getting in this package. Look, at the end of the day, in terms of cost, outfitting a small shop like this with effective dust collection is going to run you in the $2,000 range for the machine, regardless of what you end up going with. Then add a few hundred more for hoses, fittings, blast gates, and the like. I realize this isn't cheap. And as I said back in part 1, lots of weekend woodworkers get by with just a shop vac. I certainly did for years. But that said, I really consider a dust collection system, a proper one, an investment in your health. And if you're ready to step up, the Laguna C Flux 1 is certainly worthy of your consideration and your dollars, in my opinion. Let me know in the comments what you've set up in your shop for dust collection. Are you happy with what you've got? Are you looking to upgrade? Is the Laguna C Flux 1 on your list? Is there another machine I should have considered in my decision process? Is there anything you'd like to know about it that I didn't cover? I'd love to hear from you guys. If you haven't seen part 1 where I do the unboxing and step-by-step assembly, go ahead and check that out. Over here, or over here, wherever they put it. By the way, don't forget to put a like on this video and subscribe to the channel too. We've got several videos in the works and you'll be notified of all of them if you subscribe. Well, I've got a lot of projects to do and this wood ain't gonna cut itself, so back to work. I appreciate you watching. See you in the next one. Adios, amigos.